mankind's first major ocean crossing is one of the great milestones in the human journey.
It's a wonderful story. It's like Star Trek, only it really happened.
Our forefathers braved the open seas in search of a new land beyond the horizon.
It's really like going to the moon. It's even more impressive because you can see the moon from Earth.
This pioneering expedition is the earliest evidence of the human thirst for adventure, the drive to explore, the need to go where no one has gone before. This journey may hold a secret to how we conquered our planet and beyond. Many scientists believe that about 60,000 years ago, our ancestors set out on a journey that would see them populate the entire planet.
It's the big global event that contributes to the heritage of every one of us.
Prehistoric man spent millions of years colonizing Africa, Europe, and Asia, but never completed the challenging ocean crossings to conquer the rest of the world. Yet, just tens of thousands of years after the birth of modern man, a group of pioneering seafarers succeeds in reaching Australia.
Earlier forms of humans lived for more than 1 million years before this event took place. None of them ever made a successful crossing. Folks who are in the same biological category as we are made it in an archaeological instant, in a heartbeat, just like that.
This groundbreaking ocean expedition represents a major benchmark in human development.
The people who made this voyage were the first mariners.
Mungo Park, deep in the heart of Southeast Australia. Today, this is a harsh desert landscape, but tens of thousands of years ago, this was a fertile territory on the edge of a vast lake. 1974. Geologist Jim Bowler combs the sand dunes. He's looking for clues about the identity of the people who first colonized this land.
And I was on my little motorcycle zipping along this horizon where I noticed the top of a cranium just emerging from the sand. I hopped off my bike and scraped away sand from around the lower portion of the jaw, and at that stage I realized, I was looking at a most incredible example of early human burial.
Within 3 days, archaeologists excavate Mungo Man, a 170 centimeter human skeleton.
I think if you clothed him in suit and tie, and he'd be quite indistinguishable. He'd merge with the crowd today.
Bowler is convinced that Mungo Man is every inch the modern human, but he doesn't know exactly how modern. For 30 years, he is unable to prove the definitive date of his find. 2003. Earth scientist Bert Roberts takes up the cause. He investigates grains of sand buried alongside the ancient Australian remains.
In this tube we've got sands collected at the Mungo burial site. They haven't seen sunlight since a human burial was made at Mungo.
Roberts uses a technique that was not available at the time of the discovery of Mungo Man. Optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, identifies the time when the sand surrounding a buried artifact was last exposed to sunlight. Chemicals dissolve the sand, leaving tiny grains of quartz. These are painstakingly loaded onto 24 small stainless steel discs for analysis. What happens next is invisible to the human eye, but is key to the whole procedure. Once inside the machine, the quartz grains absorb energy from lasers. The sample then emits this energy as light. This process is similar to what makes some stickers glow in the dark. The stickers absorb light of one wavelength, then radiate light of a different wavelength. The longer the quartz sample has been underground, the more light it will generate. Robert's findings produce a new, precise dating for these ancient remains.
We can tell from that they were last exposed to sunlight about 42,000 years ago.
This dating proves that Mungo Man is the oldest Australian ever discovered. But there was even more dramatic news to follow.
Not only did we have the human skeletons, we also had stone tools.
These tools associated with the human habitation were also dated using OSL. They were estimated to be 50,000 years old.
That's all fantastic. Wow, this is really a very important find.
The Lake Mungo discoveries suggest modern man had arrived in Australia some 50,000 years ago. But where had these prehistoric pioneers come from? Researchers find the answer in the DNA of modern Aboriginals.
We can actually trace their ancestry all the way back to Africa.
As humans moved away from the source population in Africa, they split into smaller groups with less genetic diversity. This means scientists can track the path followed by our forefathers by analyzing the DNA of modern populations along the route.
Somewhere between 50 and 60,000 years ago, population left Northeast Africa, taking what we refer to as the southern coastal route along the Indian Ocean, around South Asia and along the coast of Southeast Asia, and ultimately to Australia between 45 and 50,000 years ago.
The genetic evidence proves that the first known Australians can be traced back to an African source. To reach the tip of Southeast Asia from Africa via the coastal route is a trek of over 15,000 kilometers. Today, that journey is possible by following the coastline and making short island hops. But Australia is separated by a stretch of water hundreds of miles across. Did our forefathers face a similar obstacle when they first set out for the island 50,000 years ago? In 2007, Matt Collar of Monash University develops a computer program to remap some southern hemisphere coastlines over the last 100,000 years.
The Earth's a very different place at the moment. The sea level's much higher than where it was when people first travelled across the world.
One of the reasons sea levels change is because the Earth tilts at an angle, a bit like a gyroscope. The angle of inclination varies over a 41,000-year cycle. The Earth's polar regions receive less sunlight when the tilt is smaller, so less ice melts and sea levels drop. Koller demonstrates the principle by filling a plasticine model of Australasia with water to simulate the oceans. In the colder parts of the cycle, the Earth turns into a giant ice maker.
We've got a huge ice cap in the northern hemisphere, which has taken all of this water out of the rest of the world's oceans. And so the level of the oceans is lower, and we've got all this extra land exposed to the air.
Koller feeds data into his computer model to calculate the precise sea level at different times in the past. This includes information from modern-day sea depth maps, satellite photographs, and uplifted coral terraces. At the top of the simulation is a timeline that covers the last 100,000 years. Koller can click and drag the pointer backwards through time to show the impact of sea level on the coastlines. His oceanic time machine is ready to run. The crucial time lies between 60,000 years ago, when our ancestors left Africa, and around 50,000 years ago, when they arrived in Australia. Throughout this period, sea levels are lower. Modern-day Australia and New Guinea are locked together in one vast landmass geographers call Sahul. Further west, much of Southeast Asia is joined in an area known as Sunda. In between are the islands that make up modern Indonesia. Koller's program proves that our ancestors had to cross a major sea barrier to make landfall in Australia.
So what you can see from this simulation is that throughout the last 100,000 years, the Australian Sahul landmass and Sunda, which was part of Asia, were never joined together directly. It always involved a major ocean crossing to get from one to the other.
This passage to Australia is the first open sea expedition in the historical record. So, who were these intrepid ancient mariners? Archaeologist Sue O'Connor travels to East Timor, at the southernmost tip of Asia, in search of information about the lives of ancient coastal communities. Much of the evidence of these people has been lost to the rising sea levels, but she strikes lucky in a region called Tutuala,
where you've got continuous uplift and a fairly rapid rate of geological uplift.
The land here is rising at a rate of about 0.5 meter per 1,000 years due to tectonic activity in the area. At Jeremalai Cave in Tutuala, this preserves an archaeological record dating back to the time of mankind's first major ocean crossing. O'Connor believes that a surprising find at this site may cast new light on the seafaring capabilities that existed in this region 50,000 years ago. Prehistoric fish bones.
It was quite clear from the size of the fish bone that we were dealing with fish with very big vertebrae, so you're looking at a large fish.
What shocks O'Connor is that these are the bones of a deep-sea fish. Tuna, as big as 0.5 meter in length. Is this proof that Timor was a prehistoric home to deep-sea fishing? A second discovery, just a few kilometers from Jeremalai Cave, is a further piece in the puzzle. O'Connor discovers a fishhook made of Trochus shell.
We had big fish bones and we wondered how they were caught, but here was the first actual evidence of how they were caught.
She's very impressed by our ancestors' choice of material.
You've got this shimmering quality which acts to attract the fish when you put the hook into the water.
To O'Connor, her find suggests that 50,000 years ago, this part of the world was home to experienced seafarers.
Here we've got people very early on exhibiting the planning to produce boats, the planning to produce fishhooks. Very modern cognitive skills.
Timor would have been the last of the chain of islands on an eastward journey through what is now known as Indonesia. Its inhabitants had the skills and technology to travel the open oceans. O'Connor believes that this pinpoints this area of Southeast Asia as the likely launching point for the first passage to Australia. A new computer program shows exactly the challenges faced in making a journey from Timor to Sahul, modern-day Australia, some 50,000 years ago.
So after the few short island hops from Bali across to Timor, Sahul is still another 140 miles away. You're next faced with a huge barrier to get across, which is the Timor Sea.
This is a formidable distance to cover in a prehistoric sea vessel, but it also raises a second question. Could the ancient mariners see their destination as they set off, or was this a mission beyond the edge of their known world? If you were to stand on a beach and look out toward the horizon, you can only see so far because of the curvature of the Earth. The higher up you are above sea level, the further to the horizon you can see. There is a mathematical equation to work this out.
The distance you can see is given by the square root of 2 times the height of the mountain you're on times the radius of the Earth.
The highest mountain on Timor is Mount Ramelow at 2.9 kilometers high. The radius of the Earth is 6,378 kilometers. Plugging these figures into the equation proves that from the highest point on Timor, you can see a maximum of 192 kilometers. Our ancestors could not have seen Australia, which was at least a further 30 kilometers over the horizon.
What is certain is that if the first Australians did make that voyage, that they didn't know exactly what was on the other side. They were certainly travelling into the unknown.
Modern man's first major ocean crossing was a bold expedition beyond the edge of the known world. It was also an impressive technical achievement, seemingly beyond the capabilities of earlier forms of our species. What gave our ancestors the edge to complete this mission impossible? Tim Crowe of Oxford University is an expert on the human brain. He traces the birth of modern man and the emergence of the sophisticated skills necessary for ambitious undertakings such as the first major ocean crossing some 50,000 years ago back to a single evolutionary development.
The evidence is that it occurred relatively suddenly at 150,000, maybe 200,000 years ago. And I think it has to be a genetic change.
Crowe believes that a mutation in human DNA led to a dramatic rewiring of the brain.
The human brain is lateralized. That is to say, the two sides of the brain are a little bit different.
The modern human brain is asymmetrical, cortex, the grey strip on the outside of the brain, is responsible for analysing all incoming messages and preparing outgoing instructions. The cortex is thinner on the front left half of the brain and broader on the front right half. The opposite being true for the back half of the brain. The cortex is broader on the left and thinner on the right. Crowe believes this asymmetry of the two sides of the brain creates the essential attribute of modern humanity.
If you want to point a finger at one capacity which is characteristic of man, there's no doubt it's language.
He claims that it is our language skills that set us apart from earlier forms of humans, and that this modern brain originated in a single male. His lineage prevailed over many generations as a result of sexual selection, creating a population with advanced cognitive skills.
Most people, I think, would imagine that 50,000 years ago humans were different. I don't think so. I think that 50,000 years ago they were very much as we are now.
These new skills could have enabled our ancestors to spread rapidly across the planet to areas of the world that earlier forms of man had never reached. They completed perilous ocean crossings to new continents, Australia and America. And modern DNA evidence supports the theory that they did it very quickly.
By comparing a population that had migrated from somewhere to its original source population, we can see how many mutations have occurred along the journey, and then we can estimate how many generations it was since the new population left.
A study of the DNA of Aboriginals shows relatively few mutations from the original African source. This suggests that the 15,500 kilometre coastal route from Africa to Sahul, modern-day Australia, was covered in less than 330 generations.
People, upon leaving Africa, got all the way to the Sahul in a very short period of time, perhaps only 5,000 or 10,000 years.
This would see each generation migrating, on average, 50 kilometres towards Australia. Our hot-footed ancestors may have been driven around the world at such a rate by a desire for convenient and nutritious food. When we need provisions, we go to the grocery store. In prehistoric times, our forefathers would head down the coast for the unpicked berries and the unfished waters when supplies ran low. And anthropologist Jim O'Connell believes that this wouldn't have taken long. He's had first-hand experience in collecting food with hunter-gatherers.
The thing that really struck me was how fast they depleted some of these patches. What I'm underlining here is the speed with which some resources can be depleted. You're not measuring it in decades, you're measuring it in weeks, sometimes in days.
One sign that provisions in a particular area are running low is when people are eating items they wouldn't normally touch.
Human foragers are potentially able to take a wide variety of prey. The prey that they take can be ranked, high-ranked, low-ranked, depending upon the ratio of nutritional benefit gained to cost incurred in handling the resources.
High-ranking items will be foods that are good for you and are easy to prepare.
Berries are a good example. Nutrient-rich. You walk out, there's the bush, pick, eat, you're in business.
At the other end of the spectrum are foods which are difficult to prepare and eat. When you have to choose these foods, it's time to move on. Archaeologist Hugh Barton analyzes the tools which our ancestors may have used as they made their way through Southeast Asia en route to Australia tens of thousands of years ago. He looks for traces of food to learn about the prehistoric diet.
As you can see here, this is what we're after. Here we've got a starch granule.
The granule is 16 microns high, 1 micron being about 1,000th of a millimeter. Barton can identify the plants the ancient tools were used to prepare. At Near Cave, modern-day Borneo, something pretty unappealing is on the menu.
We were able to detect a group of plants that were very poisonous and, quite toxic.
It is possible to eat this kind of food, but it takes a lot of work to make it safe.
Here we have a tuber of the yam, Dioscorea hispida. This is the very nasty, toxic yam. It's been written that a piece that's about the size of an apple, so about this much, is enough to kill an adult.
The yam needs a whole series of processes to make it fit for human consumption. The fact that people went to this effort to prepare their food suggests that there was a shortage of more convenient alternatives.
If those are the items they're taking, they're working very hard for their nutrients. So they should be looking for other opportunities.
For the prehistoric humans facing the open seas that separated them from Australia, it would have been a tough call. Is it harder work to live off a diminishing supply of poor quality food, or to head off in search of better options?
So at least some people in that local group are likely to run the numbers, metaphorically speaking, and say, we could do better and see what's cooking on the other side of the water. The trick is doing better someplace else requires building a boat and moving.
Our ancestors had the drive and ambition to brave the open seas in search of new lands with more and better resources. Their journey is one of the great milestones in mankind's technological development.
Well, the Houston approach is go all engine. You're looking good.
We humans wrote the latest chapter in our scientific exploration achievements in 1969, when Neil Armstrong first set foot on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
But just as Armstrong put his faith in human ingenuity to sustain him in a hostile environment, so did the people who launched out on the first major ocean crossing about 50,000 years ago.
In the history of humanity, that was the first time that humans deliberately took their own fate into their own hands and entrusted themselves to their own technology.
But exactly what kind of boats were used to make the pioneering first expedition to Australia? Replicative archaeologist Robert Bednarik has dedicated his life to piecing together the evidence of how early humans built sea-going crafts. He has studied the aerodynamics of modern seacraft and the archaeology of ancient vessels to develop a blueprint for the type of raft he thinks was used to make this historic journey. To replicate such a vessel, Bednarik uses only materials and tools that would have been available to the Stone Age mariners.
About 50,000 years ago, we have dozens of different types of stone tools, each of which was designed for a specific purpose.
Bednarik believes that the development of prehistoric craft building in Indonesia was aided by the abundance of one plant: bamboo.
Well, we have here a stand of bamboo, and it isn't terribly surprising that seafaring began in Indonesia, because Indonesia is of course renowned for its great variety of bamboo species.
Bamboo stalks are made of a series of sealed airtight chambers. This makes it a natural flotation device and an ideal material for constructing a raft. Bednarik takes out a stone tool and gets to work on chopping down a bamboo stalk.
Well, it takes me about 2.5 minutes to cut this one down.
Felling enough bamboo to build a raft would only take a couple of days at most. The next item on his prehistoric shopping list: material to bind the stalks together: forest vine.
The tensile strength of the binding material is of course of great importance in a raft construction, because if the raft were to disintegrate at sea, the people on it would be in deep trouble.
The design of a simple raft requires a balance between two opposing parameters. The drag, or water resistance, of the vessel increases with the area of the cross-section, but the stability of the boat decreases with width. Bednarik calculates that the best compromise between these dimensions for a raft which could be powered by paddlers is about 13.5 meters long and 3.25 meters wide. The base of the raft is constructed from 2 layers of the buoyant bamboo stalks lashed together with the resilient forest vine. Cross members maintain the rigidity of the vessel. His design weighs over 1,000 kilograms.
I believe that this might be very similar to the kind of raft that was used 50,000 years ago to reach Australia for the first time.
Bednarik has learned from constructing earlier, more complicated vessels that simplicity is key. He also believes they probably did not use sails.
The greater probability, however, is that they were carried by the currents and by the monsoon, and were probably paddling at least some of the way.
Travelling during the monsoon season would mean that the prevailing winds would have helped steer them towards Australia. Before any raft was launched, though, how could our ancestors be sure land was out there to find? Evidence suggests that they would not have been able to see Australia on the horizon from Timor. However, the environment around them would have provided hints that land was out there, waiting to be discovered. Expert in Australian studies, Steve Webb, believes the first Australians would have had the capabilities to put these clues together.
We've lost some of the things, some of the skills, some of the natural tricks, I suppose, that they had, because we've now, certainly as Europeans, been out of being a hunter-gatherer for 8,000 years.
Looking to the sky some 50,000 years ago may have indicated that new land was over the horizon to populate. People may have been attracted by huge smoke plumes from natural bushfires in Australia or cloud formations they might have seen from Timor. Webb believes that once at sea, their heightened senses would have also suggested land was out there.
They'd have this computer, this original computer between our ears, ticking away, and all these inputs going in. Temperature, currents, flotsam. What type of flotsam? Is it tropical? What are the birds doing? Are they seabirds? Are they land birds? Do we follow them? Is this taste the water? Is it the same sort of salinity as it's been all the time? You can taste the differences. We can't, but they could. are you coming close to the output of a giant river? And if so, follow it in.
However, thinking land is out there and successfully navigating towards it are two different things. Webb wants to know how the first mariners were able to plot a course to a land beyond the horizon. He boards one of Australia's oldest working boats, the Tribal Warrior, to meet with ocean navigation expert Jonathan Boucher. Modern boats are guided using electronic devices, mostly GPS, Global Positioning System. Boucher has sailed solo around the world using only more traditional navigation methods.
To get a fix that is a position using celestial navigation with morning or evening stars and planets will take me about 20 minutes while a GPS will do it in seconds. But at the end of it, I will still find out where I am.
He plotted a course from the stars using a sextant.
50,000 years ago, obviously they didn't have sextant, but there's one thing they had, and that was the stars. And they could understand the sky. They knew the sky. They knew the constellation.
Do you think they had some sort of instrument they could have used?
I don't see why they could not use homemade instruments, because a sextant is a homemade instrument when you think about it. Reason to believe that they use fishbone.
Using fishbone as a form of prehistoric sextant would be an obvious choice of material for Stone Age fishermen. A sextant measures the angle of the sun or a particular star above the horizon. The angle changes with the position of the vessel, so seafarers use this reading to establish their location and plot a course.
In actual fact, what you say is actually similar to the sextant, because you could use a point on this vertebra to say that's the horizon and watch the star come in to each of these and follow the angles.
So out of a very simple fishbone, we actually have created an instrument of navigation.
To construct ocean-ready craft and navigate to a far-off land over the horizon, it seems likely that these early humans had excellent communication skills and a keen understanding of the environment they lived in. But were the people that made this historic crossing really pioneers, agents of their own destiny, or were they simply victims swept up on a distant beach by chance? Historians have not always believed that our Stone Age ancestors were great visionaries or bold explorers. People capable of the leap of imagination required to head off over the horizon in search of a new land. But our forefathers did populate Australia some 50,000 years ago. So could a raft load of accidental mariners survive such a long journey? Physiologist at Columbia University Medical Center, Dr. Kay Salakati, knows that having enough fresh water for everyone on board the raft would have been key to completing such a voyage successfully. In fact, it could have been the difference between life and death.
You know, people think pain is the most powerful sensation, but I think there are studies which suggest that thirst is much more powerful.
Dehydration is caused by the body losing too much water. If a person loses in excess of 10% of their total body water, then coma and death can occur. Derek Rubin is a member of the New York Rowing Association. he's agreed to do an hour's hard rowing to see how much weight in the form of body water he loses. This will give an indication of how much water the Stone Age mariners would need to drink to keep hydrated during the crossing to Australia. Al-Akati weighs Rubin before he starts.
The first problems appear in the brain, so thinking abilities, cognitive abilities of the brain will start becoming impaired as the percent of water that is lost approaches 5% maybe.
A loss in excess of 10% of body water could have fatal consequences. For these early pioneers, physically propelling the raft themselves, the water loss may have been extreme, especially if the sun was beating down. In 60 minutes, Rubin rows 15,000 meters. He has lost 1.5 kilograms of weight, almost 2% of his total body water in just 1 hour. Al-Akati believes that this shows the early mariners had to have enough drinking water with them for each person on the raft for the first ocean crossing to Australia.
Probably 2 or 3 quarts a day would be my sense of the minimum amount.
A raft full of 8 prehistoric seafarers would have needed the foresight to take at least 20 gallons of drinking water, a strong indication that this was a planned, deliberate journey. Even more compelling evidence comes from the makeup of the group that colonized this new territory. Exactly what mix of people would be needed to successfully found a society that would flourish? Professor Jim O'Connell has studied the arrival of the first humans in Australia for more than 30 years.
When I worked in Australia in the 70s, it was very commonplace to think about Australia being colonized by the pregnant woman washed ashore on a log.
He believes that a new computer program may finally dismiss this outdated notion. He's traveled to the University of Florida to meet anthropologist John Moore to find out. Moore's computer program isn't usually put to work on the prehistoric past. He designed it to predict how many people it will take to form a society on another planet in the future.
Every size of colonizing population and every mix of male and female has a certain probability of success. I mean, if you're talking about Adam and Eve, for example, if you sent one male and one female and said, good luck, that's likely going to fail. But maybe 1 in a million times they would overcome all obstacles and have a successful population. So it's not that there's any magic number, and once you reach that, you're assured of being successful.
Moore inputs fertility estimates, mortality rates, sex ratio, and ages of a possible founder group, and his program predicts how long they will survive. There is, however, one factor that stands out.
So it's women that are the crucial element.
Simply because it's women that have the babies that ensure continual growth of any new colony.
Like if you sent 80 men and 20 women, or if they'd be all right for the first generation, but the next generation would be deadly. Or if you sent 80 women and 20 men, well, you're almost assured of success.
There had to be enough women in the initial colonizing group for it to prosper, suggesting that the decision to colonize Australia was intentional and no accident.
One problem with the accidental hypothesis is how often do women get into boats? Moreover, how often do they get in boats with enough drinking water for 6 days?
The division of sexual labour in hunter-gatherer societies, such as the first Australian colony, suggests that fishing was primarily conducted by the males in the group. It was highly likely that only men would be on board any raft accidentally swept to Australia. What mix of group would need to be in the initial landing party in order to sustain a society? Moore uses his program to run a series of simulations to discover how long different sizes of founding populations would survive. First, he simulates a colony founded by 3 couples. He runs the simulation 10 times, each run giving a different lifespan of the whole group. Taking the average lifespan of the 10 runs, the 3-couple colony dies out after 76 years.
So then I used 9 couples. I expected that they would live longer, but I didn't know how much longer. I did 10 runs. All of them died after an average lifespan of 130 years.
Moore's program suggests that when you have a group of more than 15 couples, that the chances of accelerating into a viable colony dramatically improve.
Of course, a colonizing group, if it's an extended family that starts a colony, they will necessarily have to...
Moore is convinced that this settles the argument of an accidental or purposeful colonization of Australia once and for all.
To my mind, all the evidence indicates that it was purposeful, that it was a group of organized people who selected themselves to go on this trip and didn't intend to come back.
Moore's work leaves O'Connell in no doubt about the significance of this journey.
They have to have the ability to plan and organize trips extending over periods of a week or more. So they have to be able to assess their food and water requirements. They have to organize the construction of the boat.
Working together as a team, they achieved a stunning long-term goal.
You have to imagine people who have our skills, not only our technical skills, or technical skills like ours, but also our social skills, our ability to get along, to engage socially with one another. They have to be a lot like us. They were ordinary folks, every man, every woman. They engineered this thing on their own. That makes it, to me, an amazing development, and it ranks among the top I can imagine in human history.
This dramatic journey to cross a vast ocean and purposefully colonize a far-off, unseen land may be the earliest, and in some ways the most impressive example of seeking a new destiny in mankind's long history. It accelerated the modern human spread across the rest of the globe and foreshadowed the colonization of the Americas some tens of thousands of years later. This adventure tells us a little about the modern human character, who we are, how we got here, and the importance of the driving force of human curiosity in building the world we live in today.